Count your many blessings, name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord has done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God has done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings and see what God has done. Alright, welcome to Wednesday. Running a little bit late because crazy days, and I needed to soak during lunch, and then I forgot to do my setup, which I'm doing now. Today's race is tractors because, well, we don't have tanks as an option for our races, but today's video is about tanks. Surprise tanks. I know, if you're like me, you're going, wait, a surprise tank? How does that even work? How do you surprise anybody with a tank? Those are either big, loud, and kind of obvious. They're hard to hide because they're loud and they're big. But Joe will tell you more about that if you pay attention. In the meantime, we've got a shout-out. Are you ready? Shout-out time. Here's a shout-out just for you. You support me, so I support you. This shout-out is for our friends. Let's see who it is today. Okay, let's try this again. Alright. We got Sandra, we got Sea Tripping, we got Big Ben, we got Lucia, we got RC, there's Dina, and there's Stock, Tissue, Foodie, which is Miss Vicky, Blistering, which is Mr. Jamie, there's Jerry, Northern Woman, there's Adventures, Lynch, Reverend, Jocelyn, Lucia, Fun Food, Nut Podcast, Big Ben, Stony, Josie, Easy, Trip. Looks like it's gonna be Mr. Trip. Okay, hang on a minute.
Down there and Walmart's there, so anybody got that was.
So I feel myself relaxing into a puddle of river goo. Fuck, that feels good. I'm glad. Kai says, heaving a sigh of relief. I open my eyes and look up at him. Want to explain what the hell happened back there before you whisked us away? To my surprise, he flushes and looks embarrassed. I don't know exactly. I wasn't thinking clearly. All I could focus on was getting us alone. Okay, that's...
Okay. Okay. This is Trip, and Trip is a gamer. Welcome to the network. This channel is mainly focused on virtual reality game play. As you can see, they play lots of games, Call of Duty, Battlefield, and they got some shorts and some regular videos. As you can see, I check out a little bit of everything. So if you're into gaming, check them out. Like, share, comment. Have a good day. Alright, are we recording? I wasn't sure. He's going to tell you something he believes to be interesting. You'll have to let us know what you think.
Yeah. Well, those of you who are, following on the military history, please turn to page 427 of World War I.
The rest of you just bring out your coloring books.
No, just bring out your pillows, get some breasts. I mean, this is boring for the rest of us. But anyway, little item in history. the big thing to think about, we're looking at November the 20th, 1917. Now, for the most part, when you think of World War One, the easiest thing to think of is trench warfare. You had pretty much from, the North Sea cutting across the northern part of France, all of these trenches. And, the Allies on one side were facing the Germans on the other side, and very little movement, but a lot of people died during the whole process. And it was literally a battle of attrition. These two armies would, once in a while, somebody would get ambitious and, over the top, and guys would come tearing over the top, trying to fight their way to the next, trench. But very rarely, not a lot of movement happened. Both sides started coming up with ideas regarding using artillery, both mortars and long-range shells, to try and dislodge forces on the other side. Of course, about the same time, the advent of air power. Originally, the biplanes and stuff like that were used, and interestingly enough, planes would actually have bombs on the sides of their plane to pick up and drop. Real accurate, trust me. But the one thing that was always kind of interesting, and it has at the very infancy of it, was the tank. Back then, it wasn't a Sherman or one of our M1s. This is one of your primitive, loud, clunky models, and the tanks the British were using at the time were these big, loud versions that it almost reminded you of an oversized tread caterpillar track on either side of the tank. And then it had these turrets that were built into the side there as well. Don't get me wrong, the advantage was that your troops could hide around them pretty effectively, and they couldn't be shot through. I mean, they were pretty much impervious to small armed fire. The downside is they were kind of really in the driving capacity. But what would wind up happening in 1917, late in the early winter campaign of this mess, there was a little town called Cambrai, and it was located along the front line. It was about X number of miles behind enemy lines. It was at that time considered one of the German points of supply, and so the idea was if they could get back there, capture it, it would basically put the German front line into disarray. Capture that town, the nearby Berlin Ridge, and the German line in the north would start having issues. Well, what wound up becoming kind of the litmus test was originally they only wanted to use infantry and artillery to try to dislodge this German line. There was a Major General Henry Tudor, commander of the Royal Artillery, 9th Division, came up with the idea with artillery and infantry tactics on his sector of the front. And then during preparations, J.F.C. Fuller, staff officer with the Tank Corps, was looking for places to use tanks on the raids. Well, General Julian Byng, commander of the 3rd Army, decided to put both plans together. The French and British armies had used tanks en masse earlier in 1917, although with considerably less effect. Now, the big thing that they were looking at when you get into the happiness of this massive plan, the proposal called for a quote unquote large number of tanks originated from Brigadier Hugh Ellis of the Tank Corps and the reliance on the secret transfer of artillery reinforcements to the silently registered to gain surprise came from Henry Tudor, commander of the 9th Scottish Infantry Division Artillery. In August, he conceived this idea of a surprise attack of the 4th Corps sector, and he suggested a primarily artillery infantry attack, which would be supported by a small number of tanks, small, that would break through the Germans down to the Hindenburg Line, which is kind of like at their time, like the Siegfried Line. Now, the German defenses were formidable. This was no lie. Cambrai was a quiet front, and the Germans had built quite an elaborate defense in depth. Now, Tudor's planned to test the new methods of combined arms with the emphasis of joint artillery and infantry tactics to see how effective they would be against these German fortifications. Tudor advocated using a new sound rating and silent registration of guns to achieve instant suppression of fire and surprise. So they're kind of playing tactics.
Ooh.
He wanted to use the tanks to clear paths through the deep barbed wire obstacles in front of the German positions, while supporting the tank force with the 106th Fuse, designed to detonate high explosive ammunition without cratering the ground to supplement the armor. So kind of a tactical approach. Well, 2 weeks before the start of this battle, the Royal Flying Corps started to train its pilots in ground attack tactics. Before the ground offensive, the RFC was assigned to sets of targets to attack, including trenches, enemy supply points, and airfields. Now, this battle began at dawn, about 6:30 on the 20th of November, with a predicted bombardment by 1,003 guns on German defenses. That's a lot of firepower kicking loose.
That's a lot of guns.
Followed by smoke and a creeping barrage at 300 yards ahead to cover the first advances. Now, despite efforts to preserve secrecy, the Germans had received sufficient intelligence to be on moderate alert. Hey guys, look at all the rumbling tanks. An attack at Harbencourt was anticipated, as was the use of tanks. The attacking force was 6 infantry divisions of 3rd Corps, with Lieutenant General Pulteney on the right, and 4th Corps with Lieutenant General Charles Whitcomb on the left, supported by 9 battalions of tank corps. Give you an idea, this is 437 tanks. That's kind of hard to hide anywhere.
Yeah, I say it again. Are you surprised with tanks? I see them coming.
Yeah, and again, you know, this was back in the day when you had these great big lumbering boxes with these huge, you know, treads, and noisy, smoky, you know, loud, obviously.
They're loud, they're big, they're hard to hide.
Yeah, well, what are you going to hide it behind? A planet? You know, not exactly easy. Now, in reserve, they kept behind 1 infantry division of 4th Corps, 3 divisions of cavalry, with Lieutenant General Charles Cavanaugh. Additionally, there was considerable success in most areas, and it seemed if a great victory was within reach. The Hindenburg Line had been penetrated with advances up to 5 miles. Now, on the right of the 12th, Light Division, or Eastern Division, advanced as far as Lateau Wood before being ordered to dig in. The 20th Light Division forced away through La Vicaire and then advanced to capture a bridge across the Canal de Saint-Quentin at Manciès. The bridge collapsed under the weight of the tank, halting the hopes of an advance across the canal. In the center of the 6th Division, they captured Rivecourt and Marling, but when the cavalry pressed through late, they were repulsed from Noyelles. Now, on the 4th Corps front, the 51st Highland Division, with Major General George Harper, was held at Flesquez. Its first objective, which left the attacking divisions on each flank exposed to enfilade fire, Harper had used a local variation of the tank drill instead of the standard one laid down by the tank corps. Flesquez was one of the most fortified points on that German line and was flanked by other strong points. Its defenders, under Major Krabs, acquitted themselves well against the tanks.
Major Krabs.
Mr. Krabs.
Mr.
Krabs, actually. Almost 40 being knocked out by the artillery in the vicinity. The lone gunner of the Flesquez, a common explanation of the mythical German officer, ignored the fact that the British tanks were opposed by a specialist anti-tank unit benefiting from the experience against French tanks in the Nivelle offensive. So, yeah, we're going into a shooting gallery class. Don't see how many of us are going to survive this one.
Yeah, details.
Yeah, minor detail. Maybe they'll run out of ammunition. And interestingly enough, the Germans did abandon Flisquiers during the night. To the west of Flisquiers, the 62nd or 2nd West Riding Division swept all the way through Harmoncourt and Graincourt to within reach of the woods on Barlone Ridge. And on the British left, the 36th Division actually reached Bapaume and the Cambrai Road. Of the tanks, 180 were actually out of action after the first day, although only 65 had been destroyed. Of the other casualties, 71 had suffered mechanical failure, and 43 had been ditched. Now, the British lost 4,000 casualties and took 4,200 prisoners.
Oh dear.
A casualty rate that of half of the Third Battle of Europe in Passchendaele, and the greater advance in 6 hours than in 3 months at Flanders.
Well then.
Yeah, but the British had failed to reach Barlone Ridge. The German command was quick to send reinforcements, and that relieved that the British did not manage to fully exploit their early gains. Again, they dug in, which it almost seemed like a natural habit, but maybe they were worried they were going to run out of ammunition or something.
Valid point.
Yeah. When the battle was renewed the next day, the pace of the British advance was greatly slowed. Flisquiers that had been abandoned and Catange were captured in their very early morning, but in general the British took to consolidating their gains rather than expanding. The attacks by 3rd Corps were terminated and the attention was turned to 4th Corps. Now the effort was aimed at Barlone Ridge. The fighting was fierce around Barlone and at Enox. Just before the woods was costly. German counterattacks squeezed the British out of Mervers on the 21st and Fontenay on the 22nd when Enox was taken, and 62nd Division found themselves unable to enter the Barlone Wood. The British were left exposed and assailant. Haig still wanted Barlone Ridge, and their exhausted 62nd Division was replaced by the 40th Division, Major General John Ponsonby, on the 23rd of November. Supported by almost 100 tanks and 430 guns, the 40th Division attacked into the woods on Barlone Ridge on the morning of the 23rd of November, made little progress. The Germans had put 2 divisions of Group Arras in the ridge with another 2 in reserve, and Group Cadre was reinforced. Well, the 40th Division attack would reach the crest of the ridge, but held there and suffered more than 4,000 casualties in 3 days.
Oh my.
That would be a mess. More British troops were pushed in to move beyond the woods, but the British reserves were rapidly depleted and more German reinforcements were arriving. The final British effort was on the 27th of November by the 62nd Division, aided by 30 tanks. Early success was soon reversed by a German counterattack. The British now held a salient roughly 6.8 miles by 5.9 miles with its front along the crest of the ridge. On the 28th of November, the offensive was stopped and the British troops were ordered to lay wire and dig in. The Germans were quick to concentrate their artillery on the new British positions, and on the 28th of November, more than 16,000 shells were fired into the wood. Oh, crud. Now, as the British took the ridge, German reinforcements began to arrive. Hi, guys.
Hey.
By the 23rd of November, the German command had felt that the British breakthrough had been prevented and began to consider a counterstroke, and 20 divisions were assembled in the Cambrai area. Remember that town that they were supposed to take?
No.
Yeah, the Germans had been waiting. Now, Germans had planned to take their Barlone salient and also to attack around Havencourt with divisionary attacks to hold 4th Corps. It was hoped that at least to reach the old positions on the Hindenburg line. The Germans intended to employ the new tactic of a short, intense period of shelling, followed by a rapid assault using Hutier infiltration tactics, leading elements attacking in groups rather than waves and bypassing strong opposition. 3 divisions of the Group Arras under General Lieutenant Otto von Moser, were to conduct the initial assault by Merlot. On the eastern flank of the British salient, Group Cadre was to attack from Bonzanel to Rumeli to capture Marcoing. Group Mazzingni advanced from Bantru, and two Gruppen had 7 infantry divisions, so they were not shy on soldiers. The British 7th Corps, with Lieutenant General Thomas Snow, to the south of the threatened area, warned 3rd Corps of German preparations. The German attack began at 7 a.m. on 30 November. Almost immediately, the majority of 30 Corps divisions were heavily engaged. The German infantry advance to the south was unexpectedly swift, and the commanders of the 12th Eastern Division and 29th Division were almost captured, with Brigadier General Berkeley Vincent having to fight his way out of his headquarters and grab men from retreating units to try and halt the Germans. In the south, German advances spread across an 8.1 mile and came within a few miles of the village of Metz and its link to Berlin. At Berlin, the Germans suffered many casualties. British units displayed reckless determination. One group of 8 British machine guns fired over 70,000 rounds against the German advance. Just open up on them.
No.
The concentration of British effort to hold the ridge was effective, but allowed the German advance elsewhere greater opportunity. Only counterattacks by the Guards Division, the arrival of British tanks, and the fall of night allowed the line to be held. By the following day, the impetus of the German advance was lost, but pressure of the 3rd of December led to the German capture of Le Vercors and the British withdrawal on the east bank of the San Quentin Canal. The Germans had reached a line curving from Quinton Ridge to near Marcoing. The German capture of Boniface Ridge made the British hold on Berlin precarious. On the 3rd of December, Haig ordered a partial retreat from the North Salient, and by the 7th of December, the British gains were abandoned except for a portion of the Hindenburg line around Havencourt, Ribecourt, and Flesquieres. The Germans, having exchanged this territorial loss for a slightly smaller sector to the south of the Welsh Ridge. Now, the success of that first day was greeted in Britain by the ringing of church bells. The massed use of tanks, despite being a further increase on previous deployments, was not new, but the success of the attack and resulting Allied press enthusiasm was unprecedented. The particular effectiveness of the tanks at Cambrai was the initial passage through barbed wire defenses, which had been previously supposed by Germans to be impregnable. The victory showed that even the most elaborate field fortifications could be overcome by surprise attack using the combination of new methods and equipment, reflecting in a general increase of the British capacity to combine infantry, artillery, tanks, and aircraft in the attacks. They basically learned that, if something simple is not doing it, go ahead and get creative. The advantage with the tanks, it was able to break through German lines that originally they were thinking were going to stop them no matter what. So, you got to get hats off to some of these guys for doing some forward thinking for a change.
No.
Yeah.
How dare you?
I know. Heaven forbid. Now, looking at the fun, the German revival after the shock of the British advance improved German morale, but the potential for similar attacks meant that the Germans had to divert resources to anti-tank defenses and weapons, an extra demand that the Germans could ill afford to meet. The Crown Prince Rupert mentioned, wherever the ground offers suitable going for tanks, surprise attacks like this may be expected. That being the case, there can be no more mention, therefore, of quiet fronts. So, if you think about the times of some of these wars, obviously during the summer when it's drier, get ready for some rumbling.
Rumble, rumble, roar.
Now, it does bear mention, German counterattacks showed the effectiveness of artillery, trench mortars, and evolving storm troop tactics adopted from methods introduced by Hutier and his artillery commander, Colonel George Buchmüller, against the Russians. From the German perspective, questions arose regarding battlefield supply beyond railheads and the suitability of the MG-08 machine gun for rapid movement. By the end of the battle, the British retained some of the ground captured in the north, and the Germans a smaller amount taken in the south. The British conducted several investigations, including a court of inquiry. According to the statistics of the military effort of the British Empire during the Great War, the British forces in France in the period of the Battle of Cambrai suffered 75,681 casualties, 10,042 killed or died of wounds, 48,702 wounded, and 16,987 missing or prisoners of war. Wilfred Miles, the official historian, gave British losses in the 3rd Army, Tank Corps, and the RFC from the 20th of November to the 8th of December as 44,207, 40,000 of them in the main battle. On the first day, 179 tanks were lost, 65 being knocked out, 71 suffered mechanical defects, and 43 others by other causes. The British would take 11,105 prisoners, 98 field guns and howitzers, and 40 heavy guns and howitzers, 456 machine guns, and 74 trench mortars. So they cleaned up pretty good. The British would record casualties on the basis of a daily head count, and during the war, the Germans counted the number of patients in the hospital every 10 days, which admitted lightly wounded, expected to return to service in a few days, not evacuated from the core area. Now, after the war, the Germans compiled Starschrift, a German army medical report of World War I, in which the Germans suffered 54,720 casualties at Cambrai, 8,817 killed and died of wounds, 22,931 wounded, and 22,972 missing and prisoners of war. So, again, it was another page in the very bloody history of World War I. But it again showed the fact that if you stacked your attacks and you used multiple forms of attack, you could actually get some, forward momentum going. And these things that they learned here would later, pave that road in 1918. Now, for the part that me and Sue like a whole bunch, memorials and cemeteries.
What? No.
Now, interestingly enough, the Battle of Cambrai is commemorated annually by the Royal Tank Regiment on Cambrai Day. The contributions of the Newfoundland Regiment at the 1917 Battle of Cambrai are remembered in the village of Mensiers in Mensiers, Newfoundland Memorial. Cambrai Day is also celebrated by the 2nd Lancers of the Indian Army on the 1st of December every year, as Lance Daffodar Govericine of that unit was awarded the Victoria Cross during the battle. The name Cambrai was chosen in 1917 as the new name of the South Australian town of Rhinevilla, one of the many Australian places that changed names from German names during the First World War. During the remilitarization of the Rhineland in the 1930s, Germany named a newly built Kaserne in Darmstadt after the battle, which was later merged with the nearby Fur von Frisch Kaserne to become Cambrai Frisch Kaserne. And the United States Army actually occupied the Cambrai Frisch Kaserne from the end of the Second World War until 2008, when the land was returned to the German government. Now, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission has 4 memorials with the names or remains of 9,100 Commonwealth servicemen who died during the Battle of Cambrai. The Cambrai Memorial to the Missing, the monument lists 7,048 missing soldiers of the United Kingdom and South Africa who died and have no known graves. Fresquiers Hill British Cemetery has 900 servicemen were buried, 1/3 unidentified. The Oroville Wood Cemetery has 200 servicemen buried, and the Hermes Hill British Cemetery has 1,000 servicemen buried. Interestingly enough, on the other side of the front line, the German War Cemetery on Road D Somlas was established before the offensive in May 1917, and it accommodates the remains of 10,685 Germans, and 501 British soldiers.
Huh.
So they got soldiers from both sides buried in their cemetery. Now, again, as they were mentioning, the battle is sometimes referred as the first use of large numbers of tanks in combat, or even as the first use of tanks at all, although it is the first big combined arms operation. Tanks had been used sometime since the Battle of Flers-Conchiart on the Somme in September of 1916. So it wasn't, over a year later, but it was also considered the first real good surprise attack that, they were thinking they were just going to have infantry and artillery. Surprise, here comes the tanks. Also, Hammond rebutted claims that Harper's changes contributed to the British failure and wrote that they had been exaggerated by Wilfred Miles, Christopher Baker Carr, and others. The attack was the sixth occasion in which the division operated with tanks, and the ground in the 51st Highland Division area had far more small fortifications. This method chosen had been tested in training and were not the cause of the check at Flers, which is due to the presence of the German 54th Division of Field Artillery Regiment, specifically trained in anti-tank tactics, and the reluctance of Harper to commit his reserve brigade. Now, some accounts claim 5 tanks were knocked out by an artillery officer, Theodore Kruger, of FIR 108. Haig's dispatch praised the gunner's bravery in his diary. There is little evidence of Kruger's actions, although it is possible that he may have been responsible for as many as 9 tanks. 28 tanks were lost in the action, although German artillery fire and breakdowns. Haig concluded the skirmishing infantry was needed to bring the artillery crews under small arms fire to allow the tanks to operate. So even back then, if you had good anti-tank weaponry and were in a good position, your pillboxes, your foxholes, and a tank had nowhere to move, it's a sitting duck. And until they were able to bring up infantry, which is why, even in World War II, you wanted to have that extra mobility, the extra soldiers, to keep the enemy honest. Because if you gave them a chance to just sit there and, well, let's be honest, pill shot them, then obviously your tanks are as good as dead. So they learned real quickly that you needed, if you're going to take and bring up tanks needed a little extra help, because again, tanks didn't have very good visibility either. Little slots out to see out of. Interesting enough, U.S. troops fought in the fighting on the 30th November when a detachment of the 11th Engineer Railway Regiment, working on construction behind British lines, dug reserve trenches at the village of Fins. They were later engaged in combat and suffered 28 casualties. I did notice one thing also in one of my notes. Interestingly enough, the belligerents, the two sides that fought, you had forces from the United Kingdom, India, Newfoundland, France, the United States, and China. So, again, World War I, you had people from all over fighting Axis versus the Allies, or in this case, Central Powers. But you had commanders on the Allied side, Douglas Haig, Julian Byng, and William Palgrave. And then on the German side, you had George von der Marwitz, Otto von Moser, and Hugo von Katzen. Interestingly enough, the Allies had 15 infantry divisions, 4 cavalry divisions, 1,003 guns, 476 tanks, while the Germans had 20 infantry divisions. So they had a lot more on the infantry lines and a lot more guns. They had almost 1,240 guns. But again, the Germans would also lose a lot more of those. But overall, looking at the different historians, they claimed it pretty much a draw. About the only thing you can say for it, again, being a battle of attrition, is that obviously the dead would not fight again. The wounded, it depended on how good your medical teams were at patching your soldiers back up and getting them back out on the field. And eventually the Allies would wind up winning World War I. But again, that's another story.
Are you sure?
Yep. All right, this has been the Bearded Historian for another little day in history. And we will be seeing you guys later in the week. Have a good one. You gonna say bye bye to the people?
No,
No? Okay.
I can't leave yet.
Can't leave yet?
I